Right, welcome everyone to this session. This is Proliferating Renewables, Generating and Procuring Renewable Energy. For those of you that are hoping to receive continuing education credits for this session, here is the learning objectives and the description of the course. We will follow up after the teach-in with an email asking you to complete a brief survey to receive your credit numbers in order to help you facilitate your credit with your institutions. Additionally, we will have a question and answer session at the end of this section. If we are not able to answer all of the questions that come up through the session, we will be able to follow up via written responses from the presenters, and we will post those to the CarbonPositive website. So please keep an ey out for that if we run out of time to answer your questions. My name is Vincent Martinez. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Architecture 2030. It is my pleasure to be able to moderate this session on renewable energy. I am very pleased to have two wonderful presenters from the African region talking about renewable energy. We have Thinus van As, who is the associate at Arup Engineering, as well as Zak Ferreira from Nedbank CIB. So really appreciate having both of their expertise. I think it's going to be a very informative session. If you happen to have joined us for the North and South America teach-in, we also had a different Arup colleague, Cole Roberts, and talking about on and off site procurement. Those recordings are also available, but I think we're going to get a whole different, fresh look here today. So very excited about this presentation. Thinus, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and starting us off.
Thanks, Vince. How does that look?
Looks excellent.
Excellent, great. Hi everyone, welcome to my part of the CarbonPositive Reset Global Teach-In. As Vince said, my name's Thinus van As and I'm speaking to you from Cape Town, South Africa. I lead the Cape Town energy team, and from here we work on projects all over the world, and we love being part of the renewable energy industry, helping our clients sleep better at night. If you wouldn't mind, I would just like to say a few words about Arup. Arup was founded in 1946 in London, and since then we grew into a global company currently active in 38 countries, in 93 offices with around 16,000 creative designers, engineers, planners, and other professionals working in the built environment. On this slide, you can see a few iconic projects that Arup was involved in and is known for. Here you'll see the Sydney Opera House, the Marina Bay in Singapore, Apple Park in Cupertino, the Shard in London, and also the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona in Spain. So proliferate is, of course, a verb which basically means to multiply. So therefore, it assumes that you have something to start with. And in terms of renewable energy, we have so much already. The question can then be posed as follows. How do we proliferate renewables by building on the skills and technology we already have? This talk will aim to discuss this question at a high level in the few minutes that I have, and we are for the most part on the right track, but there is much more work to be done. So this graph shows the increase in investment in clean energy globally since 2004. The increase in commitment to proliferating clean energy is clear, and this forms a solid foundation on which we can build. Zak from Nedbank will be speaking after me and shed more light on the investment side of things, and he also has his checkbook at the ready. So, as with many complex questions, we should start at the bottom to unravel and understand the key drivers and threads. In order to proliferate renewables, it's important to look at how we consume our energy, how we generate our electricity, and from that we can move forward by implementing technologies that make sense. So on the left we can see that really only 20% of our consumption is electricity, yet the fourth highest generator of carbon emissions is the power sector. First and second highest generator of emissions is industry, and third is transport. We are, in my opinion, doing well in the power sector, and that will carry on, of course. But since we're already generating we must do much more in the industrial and transport sectors. So we can certainly electrify those sectors much more and move to greener technologies like hydrogen. So let's have a look at some technologies to get a grip on the most flexible and versatile of them. First up is the well-known solar power. We can use solar to generate electricity at utility scale, and large parts of the world's solar irradiation abounds. So solar technologies can be combined with storage, such as batteries and liquid storage. Solar PV is also easily installed on water bodies, and floating PV projects are coming online more and more frequently these days. To proliferate solar power, I believe in future excess power or even all of the generated power should be used to power electrolyzers to generate products such as hydrogen for industrial and transport use. On residential scale, solar PV rooftops can power our domestic needs and also power electric vehicles. The market for solar power is well established on a residential, commercial, and utility scale. Next up is wind energy. We can use the wind to generate electricity at utility scale, of course, and in large parts of the world, wind resource abounds at all times of the day. Wind energy projects should more often be combined with battery storage, and in future it should be used to generate hydrogen for industrial and transport sectors. Floating wind power is gaining traction, and of course that opens up many areas for development of wind energy projects. Also, the market for wind power is well established for utility scale projects. The transport sector is where I believe we can make a large difference in not just decarbonizing the industry, but also cleaning up our cities of the emissions of vehicles. To activate real change in this industry, we must fast-track regulatory and tariff frameworks in the region, especially in Africa and India. And then, of course, also enable the installation of much-needed infrastructure for charging networks and hydrogen distribution networks. This will open the door for manufacturing and also the much-needed markets to sell on. Hydrogen is, of course, the talk of the town for its flexibility and wide range of applications. Of course, green hydrogen can be generated by renewable technologies using electrolyzers, and as mentioned previously. And it will be interesting to see what the future holds for hydrogen, since many nations are working hard at establishing hydrogen economies to enable decarbonization of the industry. And of course the transport sectors as well. And since those sectors are still very carbon intensive, we could do well in increasing the use of renewable technologies in those sectors. On the electrical infrastructure side of things, utilities must go back to the drawing board to avoid establishment of large interconnectors that connect power generation with loads that are countries away. I believe much better model is the distributed generation one, where power is generated as close as possible to where it is consumed. Technologies such as smart grids can enable this, where the loads could be much easier connected to the generators and in a more efficient way. In our region, and especially in other parts of Africa, utilities must come clean about their tariffs and by unbundling them and allowing customers to only pay for what they use. A very important aspect, of course, is to provide regulatory frameworks for independent renewable energy power producers to sell their wares. They will do it cheaper and more efficiently. Okay, so the holy grail of electricity generation, of course, is the ability to store power so that it can be used when needed. But energy storage systems can provide so much more in terms of grid support. Well-known technologies is, of course, pumped storage and concentrated solar power with molten salt storage. With the downward trend of battery system cost, we will see many more projects including them. Unfortunately, many battery technology and an important conversation must be had around what technologies are coupled with renewable energy generators. Technologies such as iron flow allow battery products to be 100% recyclable, and it is great to see the hard work that many companies are currently putting in to research different technologies. So to me, the key is diversity. We do not want all our eggs in one basket. We must be wise in how we consume our energy. We must have renewable energy generators everywhere where the loads are and where the resources are. We want a diversity of technologies: solar, wind, hydrogen, hydroelectric, smart grids, and then of course we want regulations that are flexible and market enabling. So the Arup Energy Resilience Framework expands much more on the different areas that must get attention in order to proliferate renewables. Leadership and strategy must be focused on the task at hand and a better future for all. The economy and societies must be enabled to use and produce energy in their own way. Markets must be available for this. And lastly, infrastructure and ecosystems are key enablers for a low carbon future. You can read more about what I've discussed in the Arup Energy Resilience Framework at the address shown on the screen, or by just searching the internet with the terms Arup Energy Resilience Framework. So that's it from me. Thank you for your time. We'll have a chance for questions later on. So next up is Zak Ferreira of Nedbank. Thank you.
Thank you, Thinus. Zak, will transition to you.
Okay, it's on. Yeah, thank you very much, Thinus. I think having an overview of the technology is very important before we get to the business end of things. Various ways of proliferating renewables, and I think finance is most definitely an integral part of that. Yeah, as mentioned, my name is Zak. I'm a senior associate with Nedbank Corporate Investment Banking, located in South Africa. I myself sit in Johannesburg, and I'd just like to give you a bit of a, excuse me, is the slideshow going on? There we go. Just a bit of background on where I fit in, and then you'll understand where my perspective of energy projects comes from. Being part of an investment bank, we focus on rolling out the and support of renewable energy project across the African continent. We currently have about 42 projects that we actively manage on our book, that we provide various forms of finance to, be it debt finance and acquisition finance, for example, on that one icon, as well as equity finance. I think what's very important to know is that these projects are only focused on renewable energy. We're very active in South Africa, Ghana, as well as in Kenya, where we participated in funding the largest wind farm on the African continent, called Lake Turkana. That's about 300 megawatts. Of late, we've started focusing on financing embedded generation solutions, basically referring to rooftop solar systems. That forms part of a portfolio of projects that developers then use as their income streams and their business case. There are three parts to my presentation today. It looks at what current drivers of growth there is, what financiers generally look for in power projects, and then future drivers of growth, and then what we see will contribute to our fight against climate change. Firstly, it's historic and current, but real drivers throughout the world have been government commitments, especially to the Paris Agreement, for example, and where their implementation of renewable energy has followed programs that is either a bidding program where developers would bid a certain tariff, and the lowest tariff would win, for example, and the government would then either buy the energy produced by that plant. Another incentive that governments have used are tax credits, as well as carbon credits and breaks that companies can get. It's very important that the private sector also commit to reducing their carbon emissions alongside governments. It can't be a one-sided affair. That development is very evident in the RE100 companies that have signed up to their commitments. The likes of the RE100 company includes multinationals such as Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft. Then third point that has been a significant driver of the adoption of renewable energy is the decreasing costs of technologies across the board, being it solar panels, inverters, and the wind turbines itself. That so much so has allowed the cost, or the levelized cost, of wind and solar technologies to beat that of fossil fuel generated energy. Then lastly, looking at infrastructure development programs, this is not necessarily the part of where energy is generated through renewable sources, but rather where governments and utilities have expanded their grids in electrification programs to get people connected to the energy sources. It's estimated that, for example, in Africa, there are about 600 million people that doesn't have access to energy, which is really a handbrake on the development of those countries and specifically the economies. Luckily, there have been a lot of support programs with that. Solar Africa, that's supported by Barack Obama. Other development finance institutions like the IFC, World Bank, and the United Nations have all contributed funds towards this expansion of national electrical grids as well as generation capacity. It's estimated that in the next 10 years, that government and private sector commitments into the renewable energy space would amount to approximately $1 trillion, which really means that every year for the next 10 years, $100 billion would be spent on expanding renewable energy programs. I don't want to kill you with a lot of figures, but really I put in these graphs so you can see the trend rather than looking at the nitty-gritty. Yeah, I received these images from a report done by UNEP, Frankfurt School, UNEP Center, and Bloomberg NEF. If you look at the graph on the left-hand side, it really shows the large-scale, excuse me, the growth of large-scale renewable energy projects worldwide for the past 16 years. As a banker, looking at the different types of green, the darker green indicates that the developers finance solar projects themselves, and the lighter green section is where banks and other investors came in to finance projects alongside developers. it's I was referring to Thinus's graph earlier as well, where that showed the significant growth in the industry. I think this really mirrors it, just depicting on where the different funds come from. You'll see small slithers on top of those graphs indicate bond funding. Those are generally instruments that finance institutions create to facilitate longer term funding for these types of projects, and that's generally the nature of them. Well, it's clear to see that it's a well-established industry right now with enormous growth potential. Looking at the project on the right, and this ties in with what Thinus said, he supports distributed generation rather than having these large-scale utility projects and with massive transmission lines for kilometers and kilometers. So this type of energy investment is largely driven by the private sector, be it homes or businesses. The sudden peak that you see was experienced in 2010, 11, and 12 was driven by the demand of rooftop solar systems in Europe, specifically Germany, where there were really lucrative incentives and feed-in tariffs in the various countries for people to start installing solar rooftop systems on their homes and feeding into the local grid. Then it tapered off when those incentive programs stopped. And lately you can see that in 2019 there has been a little bit more growth. And this is generally due to smaller groups of people feeling the responsibility to invest in solar power, and it becoming much cheaper, and that's pushed up that growth. Then very importantly, yeah, as I said, project finance forms an integral part into these projects. If I refer to what's important in terms of deal structure, for us, renewable energy projects are financed on a non-recourse basis, which really means that you don't have a look through into the balance sheet of whomever is developing it or who will be the eventual owner of the solar system. It means that we as an investor or bank would take security over the predictable cash flows that an energy project would generate over its lifetime. The nature of these projects are that offtake agreements are for timelines of 20 years and more. And thus we mirror our funding in that way. We would look at getting reliable off-takers, governments or corporates that are willing to sign these long-term agreements, as well as provide guarantees that they will be paying for the energy over the life of the contract. As I mentioned, energy projects require long-term funding. It's just due to the nature and cost of the technologies. And then lastly, looking at debt and equity capital markets, what that bullet point really means is that banks also need to find money somewhere to be able to lend to developers. Banks go into the debt capital markets to raise funding in certain forms. And I'll touch on it a bit later, but for example, debt can be raised in form of bonds, green bonds or renewable energy bonds. So just a few more graphs. As mentioned earlier, renewable energy is really becoming much more bankable than it was a couple of years ago. The slow growth in the global auction of renewables is that investors generally relied on incentives for government programs as feed-in tariffs and tax breaks. Although with things becoming much more competitive and the price of energy being lower than that of fossil fuels, there's been a significant growth in the capacity that's been installed in the last 4 years or so. Then again, looking at the importance of private sector participating in this initiative, well, basically all the graphs that I have are on the up. trajectory, but especially in the case of private PPAs, which refers to private power agreements. The largest growth in this area in the past year has definitely come from the United States, and thanks to the likes of Google, Facebook, and Amazon sticking to their commitments of procuring renewable energy, that's been the cause of the US winning that race. Future drivers of growth. Of course, this list is not exhaustive, but there are many others. But I feel that these are quite important. If I look at individual commitments and needs, I think everybody's realizing that they do have a role to play in mitigating climate change, and even if it's a small individual, yes, it does have a big impact, and everybody wants to play their parts. Looking at what I've said up to now, yes, there has been significant growth, and we've done really, really well. Although it's not time to take our foot off the gas. I think it's continuing in the way that we have done. Second point, innovative funding. Yeah, I touched on it. Banks raise capital in various forms, which they then sell to companies such as life insurance companies or endowment funds, for example, that are willing to invest into these projects, but can't necessarily directly invest into them, so they would do it through banks. Of course, there's a business case to be had on renewable energy projects. It's not a charity case, really. So projects have shown that there are attractive investment returns, and that's really, really attracting a lot of attention to the industry. I'll touch on the fourth point a bit later, but investment in research and development and new technology has significantly increased in the past couple of years. As Thinus said, the new holy grail is batteries and storage. And on the next slide, there's a graph that will show you that that's specifically the case in investing in renewable R&D. And then the last point, if I refer to policy development and changes, it's where governments and markets would liberalize their grid, for example, don't have monopoly energy producers that control the whole market, and basically evening the playing field and allow everybody to participate. Yeah, as mentioned earlier, another graph, but what's very important to see, and me living in Africa and in a developing country, I like seeing that there's been a significant shift from the amount of renewable energy installed in developed to developing countries. Yes, of course, China and India have a significant contribution towards that, but there are other countries as well, such as in Africa. One can describe the blue bars in the initial years up to 2010, the investment into developing countries as developing countries generally being, developed countries generally being early adopters of technology. And yeah, that swung around because the needs of developing countries are being addressed, and subsequently assist them with the economic development and growth of each country. In the previous slide, I did mention the renewable energy R&D, and if you look at the graph on the right, in 2017, 18, and 19, the investments of both governments and corporates into R&D has remained relatively stable and equal, and those three higher bars are ascribed to the investments in, the R&D into energy storage systems. then I think from my side, just to close off, and then I mentioned that I'll touch on the COVID point a bit later, but I think from a banker's point of view, proliferating renewable will take a number of steps or requirements, and that's firstly innovative funding. This slide you'll see that I'm just indicating that our team launched its first of its kind renewable energy bond on the continent, which really assisted 4 projects being developed at a much cheaper, let's call it interest rate to the project, which made them much more competitive in that sense. What's also very important is that the private sector involvement. We do see that happening through the larger companies like the Googles, Amazon, and so on. Although I think there's an opportunity for more medium-sized companies and smaller companies to do also get on this not the bandwagon but the train. Lastly, we've seen the devastating impact of COVID-19 on the worldwide economy, and I think it has slowed down the investment into renewable energies as well. Although governments have put together stimulus packages and economic recovery packages for various countries, and I think it's a unique opportunity post-COVID for governments to use the acceleration of renewable energies as a stepping stone and a significant tool on the path to economic growth, recovery, creating jobs. Yes, that is my final say. Over to you, Vincent.
Thank you very much, Zak. Bringing back on Thinus's video so we can have you both open for Q&A. Great presentations by both of you. Thank you for giving us such an overview of where the renewable energy market is across the world and where we are in terms of development and investment and the diversity of renewables. One of the questions that I had come up was actually for you, Thinus, which is where most of the attendees are design professionals or builders in the construction building industry field. One of the technologies that you mentioned in the diversity of the portfolio has been hydrogen power. And you, in your diagrams and Arup, in your framework, you show hydrogen going to buildings. Can you describe a little bit more about how you're seeing that being used? Are there certain typologies that you would expect of buildings to be using hydrogen? Is it going into particular types of systems? Do we have it to have a whole new infrastructure in order to support it? Could you give us a little bit more of a description about how Arup sees the future of hydrogen in buildings?
I think, yeah, thanks for the question. I think we probably look at heat generation, district heating and cooling, that sort of thing. I guess as well, if you look at I'm talking about, let's say office buildings, but of course there's a lot of other types of buildings, manufacturing, where you can use hydrogen for a number of things in industry. So I guess it's it's quite flexible. There's a lot happening, and of course also in the transport sector for hydrogen vehicles and that sort of thing. We have quite a bit of information on the hydrogen economy and enabling that sort of thing on our website. So if you'd like to know more, you're welcome to do an internet search for Arup hydrogen. There's a bunch of documents you can download there. But it's like I said in my slides, that it's very flexible and also quite new, so who knows where it's going to go. I know it's a bit of a wide answer, but that's where I see it at this point.
That's helpful. And Zach, maybe you could just say, are you seeing investments in hydrogen technology, and are they in where we are with solar and wind maybe 10 years ago, or are you seeing a projection?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing investments in that technology, especially in South Africa being quite a mining intensive country. We have some of the largest platinum reserves in the world, for example, and the company that does own the platinum mine, they're collaborating with existing renewable energy companies, such as like of energy, to really develop those hydrogen projects of theirs. I know that they've already implemented hydrogen vehicles at some of the mines in South America, for example. So yes, it's still in its infancy phases, but I think there's definitely opportunity for them in the next coming years.
Great, thank you. We do have a question in the chat box, but I'm asking for a little bit more detail. The question is, we'd like to ask, how are you going to control the very resources that are being used to develop these technologies for the green future? And I'm asking for clarification. If they're talking about mining of ore for some of these materials, where are these materials coming from to produce the renewable technologies, and do we have enough of them? I know this question comes up a lot for solar with the crystalline silicate, and maybe this is coming up for some of the wind turbines. Can you talk about some of the advancements in material technology and where we're going to get these resources from?
Yeah, I mentioned that one must be careful, and there's important conversations that have to be had on, for instance, batteries. A lot of people connect batteries with renewable technologies, and so it could be that people think because of that batteries are inherently green, and of course they're not. I believe that it's important to carry on with research and development and not, again, put all your eggs in one basket. But with all the battery competition going on, of course, you've got your technology and you sort of want to stick with that. Which I guess you can compare that to the Eastman Kodak company that didn't want to really advance digital cameras because of how it was going to influence their film business. So from what I understand, lithium, for instance, is abundant. There's no one that seems to think that we'll run out of that quite quickly. But there's a lot of other technologies going as well. You get vanadium flow, you get all kinds of things, sodium chloride and all of that. So indications currently are that we're not going to run out of any of them. But watch the space, and I think it's important to keep on doing the research and development. I hope that answers the question.
I think it's a good start, Thinus. Thank you. Zach, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I did. It is a big question, for example, with solar panels, especially where all the raw materials will come from, and then eventually at the end of the life cycle, the recycling issue.
Yeah.
I can't vouch for it. I am not sure how renewable energy, or rather solar panels, get recycled at the end of its life. But I do know with a lot of battery systems, for example, the raw materials are able to be recycled at the end. With vanadium redox flow batteries, for example, the mineral used, the vanadium, is 100% recyclable after the life of the battery.
Great. Thank you both for addressing that. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so we will have to close the session, but I did have more questions for you, so maybe I'll follow up with you later and we can add those to the site. I want to thank you again, Thinus and Zach, for joining us for this session and giving such a great overview of where we are. It's wonderful to see the trajectory, Zach, on your graphics and showing where we're headed in this and how much more we have to do yet still. So thank you all for joining us for this. I should note that while this does end this session, we will have a short break in which we will have tool demos available. You can go to the CarbonPositive website to determine which of those tool demos you would like to join over the next hour. This is your official lunch break while you watch those demos, and then we'll come back. We have 3 sessions in the afternoon to close out the teach-in. So thank you again, Zak and Thinus. We really greatly appreciate your expertise and sharing it with us.
Anytime.
Thank you very much. Yeah, pleasure.
Take care. Cheers.
Bye.